Hello everyone, I am Cum Gomez. I am a general paediatrician at Lewisham Hospital, and I'm also one of the South London Training Programme Directors. I manage the ST4 to 5 programme. I'm here today to talk you through your e-portfolio, which is also known as Kaizen sometimes, and hopefully make it your friend. We as a School of Paediatrics and as a College of Paediatrics ask that all the information that you require to show your progress through training is on your e-portfolio, and it is very much your responsibility to make sure that it is up to date and that you upload any necessary information on it. As a specialty, we do feel very much that that your training is trainee-led, and all the bar 1 or 2 forms, all of the other forms need to be initially filled out by yourselves. They cannot be accessed by your supervisor. So without further ado, I am going to take you through to the RCPCH website. Now, please do use something like Google Chrome or Safari to access the RCPCH website, because functionality on Internet Explorer is very poor. Once you've logged on, so what you will need is your RCPCH number and password. This will get you to your home page, and you can use the quick links function to go on to ePortfolio, which will then take you to the Kaizen login website, and that's just the platform that it's on, and it will then take you to your front page or your dashboard. Now, this is a test account, a dummy account, so it's not exactly as your dashboard will appear, but very close. So your details of where you are in your program and so on will be here, as well as your educational supervisor details. Here at the moment is a graphic that shows you how many assessments that you do. So obviously it will be blank for you starting off in ST1 in September, but then as you do assessments it will show up. There's information and that comes up here in terms of messages that are put out by the college or the ePortfolio team. This button is very useful because this enables you to actually access all the documents and create documents. And then this over here, it will show you the RCPCH progress domains, which is the new curriculum. So this is slightly outdated. This is the old curriculum at the moment, and then there'll be other information. So this, like I said, this is slightly old dashboard. It does change every now and again as the portfolio team take on feedback and update things and change things. So one of the updates that is happening is that on your dashboard it will show you how you are progressing in terms of tagging to domain outcomes, but that hasn't started yet. So one of the first things that you need to do once you've logged on is you need to attach yourself to a training unit, and then also attach yourself to your educational supervisor and your clinical supervisor. Now, when you do go onto the Create, you have access to a lot of these documents here. So the first one will be training post. So if you go in there and put the start and end dates. Now, the start date for paediatric training is always the first Monday of either September or March, and the end date will obviously be the Sunday before that. So put those in. You can put a description, for example, Lewisham General Paediatrics, and then you fill out your details. The next thing that you need to do is once you've attached yourself to a training unit, you need to add in your educational or clinical supervisors, and that's in the supervision section of ePortfolio. Now, for this, obviously the start and end dates are the same, but what we would encourage you to do is for the end date is to extend that by about a month beyond your actual training and post, because this just enables your supervisor to have access to your e-portfolio for a little bit longer, so that if there are any outstanding assessments that they need to fill in, and particularly things like trainers' reports, which are absolutely essential, they can still do that. Whereas unfortunately, if you put the end date as being the actual end of your post and they still have things to fill in, they won't be able to see your e-portfolio to help them get information to do that. So that's what we would encourage. Once you go through training and you're going to rotate into new posts, another useful thing is to put the start date as, say, a couple of weeks before you actually start in post, because then your educational supervisor can hopefully look at your e-portfolio before you start, just to get a little bit of information about you and how you've been progressing, and that will hopefully make your induction meeting a lot more useful. And then if you just start to type in the name of your supervisor, hopefully that should come up with their email address. Now, in terms of whether you have just an educational or clinical supervisor, that varies between training units. So a lot of training units now have an overarching supervisor, say for a year of training, even if you rotate between specialties. So if you do general pediatrics and neonates, they might just have an overarching educational supervisor, but then for the second part of that rotation, for example, when you go from general to neonates, they might give you a clinical supervisor for that, for the second 6 months, for example. So if that is the case, when you do rotate, please just add in your clinical supervisor as well, because they also need to be able to do assessment forms for you. And then, and if your training unit has separate educational supervisors for each of your 6-month posts, for example, then obviously add them on as you go along, and it's really important then that they fill out an educational supervisor trainer's report for each of those posts. So if we then go back to the forms, so the next the next forms that are really important are basically your induction meeting form, and then what's called the trainer's report form or supervised ES report for your ARCP. So we'll go through each of those in one by one. So the induction meeting, again, this has to be generated by you as the trainee. The supervisor cannot generate this, and this is one of the forms that is mandated for each training post for your ARCP. So if you don't have this, then you potentially won't get an outcome 1 at your ARCP, so make sure that this is done. And obviously, more than that, the most useful part is you need to use this as a starting point for your induction meeting with your supervisor, so they can see where you are in training, what you want to do in that post, and what you want to get out of that post. So obviously enter the details as requested, and then this section here is where you need to enter what you think you would like to be your PDP for that job, and please do try and make your objectives as smart as possible, because very generic PDP goals are difficult to sort of evidence that you have completed. And then you put in your supervisor details here, and then you can send the form to them. Now, I'm just going to use this functionality just to show you what the form will look like for the supervisor, but you can also do that. So if you happen to be sitting with your supervisor at the time that you're doing this, then you can just use the fill-in on the same device and do it there. And this is actually very useful if you're doing assessments, for example, you know, on a ward round or something, to get it done there and then. So then they have to fill out this section. And then what you should do is look at your PDP and then together convert your PDP into goals. and you can obviously give the goal title. If the goal is a little bit bigger, you can break it down into smaller targets. For example, you know, if you've put learn about respiratory pediatrics, you can say, you know, break that down to asthma and bronchiolitis, that kind of thing. And then it's quite nice because you can then tick off your targets and your goals as you go along, and then obviously you can carry on adding goals as you go. And even on the form itself, there are, you know, there is quite a lot of information about how you can use these forms. So that's your induction meeting. The next form that hopefully will be filled in is the midpoint review form, but because this meeting is not mandated, although we would very strongly recommend that you have one of these, this is one of the few forms that your supervisor can actually fill in or generate themselves. And then the next, there is also a clinical supervisor induction form. So if you've got separate education and clinical supervisors, then you should have an induction meeting with them as well. And then the next most important forms are basically your trainers reports, your educational supervisor trainers reports for the ARCP. Again, if you've got a separate clinical supervisor, then they need to generate their own form as well. Now, I'm going to click on this form just because this other one is slightly out of date. But this form has been slightly amended for the current COVID pandemic, but it's likely to go back to how it was before. But essentially, put in the details, and then as you go down, if there's a generate report function, then you need to click on that, and what that will do is it will draw down relevant information. So if this ESTR spans 2 jobs, it will draw down both of those jobs. Similarly, it will draw down, you know, PDPs and things that you've generated, and similarly you just sort of go through all of this. Now and on the progress domains, it will draw down all of the 11 domains. On this current form, which was shortened during the COVID period, it brings down all of the domains. Obviously this trainee has done some assessments that they've tagged to these various domains. It brings all of those through, and on this COVID form, it then just asks for an overall self-evaluation and reflection. On the original form, which we're likely to revert to, with each of these domains, there is a section at the bottom of each domain where you need to actually reflect on how you feel you are getting on in terms of achieving the learning outcomes for each of those domains. And the supervisor themselves also then has to do that. So again, just for ease, I'm going to show you what the supervisor section looks like. So it starts off like this. If they are also there, if your clinical supervisor, then they must tick this yes option, which then pulls down the clinical supervisor section. If they're not and they click no, then it is absolutely imperative that you have a clinical supervisor trainer's report as well for your ARCP. And then the supervisor also has to do an evaluation of how they feel you are progressing in terms of achieving your learning outcomes and competencies for your level. And again, this is done as one summary here, whereas on the original form it is done domain by domain, so it's quite involved. Some people have found it quite useful to actually do the form and in advance of their meeting and send it to their supervisor in advance of their meeting, and I would encourage you to do that, because that then gives the supervisor a chance to actually look at what you've written, look at your portfolio in a bit of detail, so that you can have a more meaningful discussion when you actually have your face-to-face meeting with them. Right, so let's just then talk about some of the assessments that you can go through. So all the different assessments are here. There is actually a very good assessment table on the RCPCH website, which if you I'll just take you through, if you go to the training and assessment section, it's being a little bit slow loading, and go to training guide. Then there is an assessment guide in table form, which tells you exactly what you need to do, essentially. This was slightly modified for the current COVID period, but is likely to revert back to normal. So this is the guide. So we're very generous as a college, and we have not mandated a minimum amount of mini KEXs and CBDs that you need to do, but if you kind of think about the fact that if you aim to do about one assessment every 2 weeks, then that will enable you to get a good range of assessments and a good number of assessments, and all of those should then hopefully help you and your trainer understand how you're progressing in terms of your learning in each post. So you can see there's lots of optional ones. The safeguarding CBD is the one you need at least one per training year at each level, and you need an MSF at each for every year, and obviously a trainer's report. So those are really the only ones that you absolutely have every single year, and as you can see per level, the other mandated ones do change depending on your level. So I'm just going to go into a hat, just hand over assessment tool just to kind of show you what it looks like. So again, date, so on, and then you record your level initial reflections. And then for each of those assessments, or anything else that you upload onto ePortfolio in terms of your development log or skills log or anything, you can then tag it to one of the 11 domains. So I'm just going to click on this domain. When you click on that, it breaks up the domain into each level, so level 1, level 2 and level 3, and shows you what the learning outcomes are for each of those levels. And then if you click on that again, it then brings up the key capabilities for each of those learning outcomes. Now, what we ask you to do is to tag whatever you're doing in terms of assessments to the key capabilities, and that will automatically draw it through to the learning outcome and then the domain. Okay, so if you do that, and then that will come up as a tag against that. Only in exceptional circumstances should you tag any one assessment to more than 2 learning outcomes, and that's because you just really need to think about why you would be tagging to more, and it's really just to make you think about what the key learning from that assessment was, even though you can, it can fit in to several at any one go. So that's a hat, and that's essentially the same process that you would use for all of the other assessments as well. And again, just because it may say that certain assessments are optional for your training level doesn't mean that you can't do them. Please do have a look at all of those and see how you can use them. The next really important thing is the development log, and as you can see, there are lots and lots of things that you can enter in this section. So clinical questions that you want to look up and research. If you've attended any clinics and you've a reflection on that clinic and your learning is really good, obviously you don't need to log every single patient, but maybe a couple of patients that you've learned something really useful from. Meetings that you've been to and what your learning has been from those, management and governance events, any presentations that you've done, any teaching, research, safeguarding cases and so on. Service experiences development log is a new item that's been introduced during the COVID period and has been really useful. So a number of trainees have had to change the way they're working during this pandemic, and they found it's really useful to reflect on those service changes. Lots of trainees have been involved in actually leading those service changes. So this is a really good one to use just to reflect on that process. And then the other really important part of the development log are the reflective notes. Now, you can use this to reflect on anything really, and it doesn't have to be negative experiences. It can be very positive experiences, for example, you know, where you've watched someone breaking bad news to somebody, or doing a difficult consultation really well, and so that you can actually think, okay, you know, what did I learn from them, and what do I want to take away? So all kinds of different things that you can use to do this reflection. But if you are unfortunate enough to be involved in a complaint or a serious incident, which all of us will be at some point in our training career, or even as consultants, then you absolutely need to enter a reflective note. When you come to ARCP, the college will send you what's called a Form R, which is what the GMC requires to show that you're progressing in training, and that asks you whether you've been involved in any complaints or SIs in that training year. And if you have, then you need to link that entry to the reflective note that you've entered in your e-portfolio. What I would like to say is that these reflective notes should be used to reflect on the learning that you have gained from that case. It is not the place where you write down every single detail of that case and all the angst that you may have experienced from that case. So we all, particularly if it's an upsetting case or a complaint or an SI, you know, we get upset, or every single one of us, and we want to spill out our heart and say, oh, I wish I'd done that, or, you know, this should have happened, or whatever. That kind of discussion is a discussion that you need to be having with your team, or your educational supervisor, or the consultant involved, or your good friends outside of medicine, but not something that you write down in detail on your reflective note. So your description of the event can be very, very brief. It could just be child with asthma. And then here, and then this is the main section where you actually write down what it is that you learnt from that case. So if it is a case of, you know, that you could give IV salbutamol, for example, for a severe asthma, you know, you can write, I have read up the BTS guidelines on asthma, and I'm aware that IV salbutamol or IVM nothing can be given for acute severe asthma or life-threatening asthma, or something along those lines. And obviously that will, the learning points will come from the discussion that you have with your supervisor around that case. And again, you can tag it to the most appropriate domains. So moving on, the other sections that you will see that are important in your e-portfolio is the skills log, so you can upload all your child protection life support certificates, and you can also use the skills log section to document any skills that you feel you want to document. So this becomes a little bit more important, say, for the more senior trainees. So once you've done your mandatory docs, for example, please do use the skills log to show evidence of ongoing competence. So, we don't want you to keep doing DOPS necessarily to show that you can do a lumbar puncture, but it is very useful if you just log an event here to say that you did a lumbar puncture and it was successful, or you did it on your second attempt or something like that, just to show evidence of ongoing competence. That's very useful. And then if you look through, there are obviously other sections that in this section. Now, the other thing that you can do to view your assessments and your e-portfolio is, rather than just going through that, you've got your timeline. That there's the functionality across here, and you can view the whole timeline, obviously, which will show you absolutely everything that's gone onto your e-portfolio, so things that you've done and things that others have done for you. And you can also then just divide it up into assessments, your MSF, your supervision, which will include sort of induction, midpoint, and end of post meetings. Your ARCP outcomes are really important, that when your ARCP is done, you look at what the outcome is. I hope you all get an outcome 1, which is you're progressing fine and you can go on to the next level of training. But even then, please do read what the ARCP panel has written at the end of each, at the end of your form, because often they will give you some pointers as to what you can do in your next post. And this is particularly important if you don't get an outcome 1, because they will be very specific in terms of what they are asking you to evidence before they give you a satisfactory outcome. And again, there's your development log, your exam results will come up here, you can view your PDP and so on. The other really important section is the document section, and in this section we would very much ask you to please create a folder for each of your ARCPs. So every year, every trainee should have an ARCP. So if you could, for all of you starting in ST1 now, an ARCP folder which says ARCP Summer 2021 is what I would expect you to do. And then you can upload various documents. Now, this is a test account, so unfortunately it doesn't have anything. But in this folder, we would ask you to please upload your Form R. You will, and any other evidence that the HEE team asks you to send in. So in addition to the Form R, the other things that we ask you to do is a placement pro forma where you list the jobs that you've done. And also another useful thing, particularly as you go through training, is something called the CCT calculator, which again is available on the RCPCH website. You just put CCT calculator, it brings out the form and with very clear guidance on what you need to enter and how you need to enter that information. And that just helps the panel work out exactly where you are in training, which is really important if you take time out of training for whatever reason, or you're working less than full time, so that we can calculate exactly what your CCT date is. Also in the document section, we would, once you've progressed through training and you do start, we'd ask you to do a start folder as well. There are FAQs actually on ePortfolio. But as I said, there's a lot of information about ePortfolio on the RCPCH website and also on the London School of Paediatrics website, so please do have a look. In the goals section, you can look at your goals, your PDPs and various other things that come up as well. The curriculum, progress curriculum will come up. And then there's the reports, and again, the progress curriculum will come up. So this, sorry, if I just go to the dashboard. So this, for all of you, will come up here. This is unfortunately the old curriculum. I'm just going to show what it looks like now. But essentially, it'll have all of the domains, and again, it will list all the events that you have tagged to these domains. So if you wanted to have a closer look, then if you just click on that box, it'll then just bring up the assessments that you have done, that you've tagged to that domain. And again, you can do it, break down further, because this is a ST4 training I think they've done it for. But again, you know, if you tag that, it'll just bring up the assessments that you've tagged to the learning outcomes for that particular domain. So that's quite useful to see, to show you how things are going. And again, you know, if you suddenly have a look and you see actually you've got no tags for the learning outcomes or the key capabilities for particular domains, then you know that that's what you need to be working on. A document that's really useful in terms of helping you see what you can use to evidence this is found in the progress, RCPCH progress guidance and support section. So if you go to the resources section of the RCPCH website, type in RCPCH progress and it'll bring this table up in downloads, and it's this document here which is preparing for ARCPs for progress. But do have a look at it. It's a very nice document. It's broken up into each of the different levels, so level 1, 2 and 3, and then in each level it is then broken up, it's split into the different domains. So this is domain 1, and it tells you the kind of things that you can use to evidence the learning that's required for that domain, and the different levels of evidence that you can use, and as you go down, all of the domains are in there for you. So I think I have said as much as I want to for this presentation. Like I said, the best way to get to know your ePortfolio is just to have a little bit of a play, have a look around, see what all the tags do, there's a lot of information on the RCPCH and the London School of Paediatrics website. The ePortfolio team also at the RCPCH are really responsive and helpful. They can be contacted by email on ePortfolio@rcpch.ac.uk, and they're very good at answering questions and troubleshooting as well. Finally, I would like to wish you all the best and also welcome you all to your paediatric training. And we very much look forward to seeing you all starting with us in September. Thank you very much for your time.